September 3rd, 1260. Dawn at Ain Jalut, Palestine. A Mongol army is marching into a valley. These are the veterans who burned Baghdad to ash. The soldiers who built pyramids from the skulls of their enemies. An army that has never not once lost a major battle. And they're about to be destroyed by men who were sold as slaves. The math here seems impossible. The Mongols conquered from China to Poland. They obliterated kingdoms, like they were crossing items off a shopping list. Their general Kitbuka is so confident, he's actually smiling as he rides into this valley. He thinks he's chasing a broken, retreating enemy. He has no idea that 15,000 heavily armored cavalry are hidden in the hills around him, waiting, silent, ready to spring the Mongols' own signature ambush tactic right back in their faces. The commander of those hidden soldiers? A man named Qutuz, a sultan who was once a Mongol slave, who watched his family die at Mongol hands, who knows exactly how they think, how they fight, how they can be beaten. And the trick he's about to pull? The Mongols taught him that one too. You're about to witness the moment the most terrifying military machine in human history learned they could bleed. The day slave soldiers used genius, terrain, and desperate courage to break an empire that seemed unstoppable. The battle that saved the Islamic world and changed the course of history. This is Ain Jalut, the forgotten battle where everything changed. To understand what's about to happen in that valley, you need to understand the absolute terror the Mongols inspired. This wasn't just another army. This was a civilization built for one purpose: war. Mongol children learned to ride horses at age 3. They could shoot arrows from horseback before most kids could read. Their entire society was organized around a decimal military system: ofs 10, 100, 1,000, and 10,000, called tumans. Orders could fly across a chaotic battlefield with terrifying precision. Their composite bows were engineering marvels. Wood, sinew, and horn, compressed into weapons that could punch through armor at distances that seemed impossible. They were almost entirely cavalry, giving them speed no settled empire could match. They could cover 100 miles in a day, appearing like ghosts, destroying everything, then vanishing. But their greatest weapon wasn't the bow. It was fear itself. Before the main army even arrived, spies would spread stories of their brutality. The policy was simple: submit and live, or resist and be erased. Not just your army, not just your king, everyone. When they sacked a city, they did it with industrial efficiency, leaving pyramids of skulls as warnings for the next town. In 1258, Hulagu Khan's grandson leashed this force on Baghdad, the 500-year-old capital of Islamic civilization. When the caliph refused to surrender, the Mongols drowned the city in blood. Libraries burned. Palaces crumbled. The caliph himself was rolled in a carpet and trampled by horses, special honor to avoid spilling royal blood directly on the ground. After Baghdad fell, Hulagu just kept rolling. Aleppo, Damascus, Syria, all gone. By early 1260, the Mongol banners stood at Egypt's border. Hulagu sent a letter to Cairo, to Sultan Qutuz. It dripped with contempt. "You have heard how we have conquered a vast empire and purified the earth of its disorders. It is for you to fly and for us to pursue. Our horses are swift, our arrows sharp, our hearts as hard as mountains, our soldiers as numerous as sand. Fortresses will not detain us." For any other ruler, this was the moment to surrender. But Qutuz wasn't any other ruler, and his army was unlike anything the Mongols had ever faced. The Mamluks are a paradox wrapped in steel. The word Mamluk literally means one who is owned, slave, and yet They were the absolute masters of Egypt, the last major Islamic power still standing. For centuries, Islamic rulers had bought young boys from the steppes of Eurasia, mostly Kipchak Turks. These weren't ordinary slaves. They were chosen for toughness, for natural fighting ability. Brought to Cairo, they were severed from their old lives completely. They converted to Islam and were thrown into one of the most brutal military training programs on earth. They lived in the barracks of the Cairo citadel. Their loyalty belonged not to family or tribe, but to each other. They drilled relentlessly in horsemanship, swordsmanship, and crucially shooting bows from horseback. When they graduated, they were granted freedom, but remained part of this warrior brotherhood for life. By 1250, they'd become so powerful, they just took over. Kicked out the old dynasty. Started their own sultanate. A military junta, run by soldiers, for soldiers. And here's what made them perfect to fight the Mongols. They were basically mirror images. Many Mamluks were the same Turkic peoples who'd been absorbed into the Mongol horde. Same steppe background. Same horseback archery mastery. Same composite bow expertise, but with key differences. Mamluk cavalry wore heavier armor, making them devastating in close-quarters brutality. And while Mongols fought for conquest, the Mamluks of 1260 were fighting for survival. They were the last ones standing. There was nowhere left to run. Their leader, Qutuz, knew the Mongols intimately. He'd been born a prince, but was captured by them as a child and sold into slavery. He'd seen their destruction firsthand, watched cities burn, watched families die. So when Hulag's threatening letter arrived, Qutuz sent a response that was clear, loud, and absolutely terrifying. He had the Mongol envoys executed, their bodies chopped in half, their heads mounted on display at the main gates of Cairo. It was the ultimate insult. There would be no talks, no surrender. This was going to be war to the death. But then fate intervened. News arrived from Mongolia. The great Khan Muningi was dead. Mongol law required all princes of the royal bloodline to return to the capital to elect a new Khan. This was always messy, often violent. Hulagu couldn't risk being left out while his cousins and brothers fought for the throne. He made a fateful decision. He took the main body of his army, maybe 100,000 men, and started the long ride back east, but he didn't abandon the conquest. He left behind an occupation force. Around 10,000 too. 20,000 soldiers. Deadly, experienced, confident. He put them under General Kitbukanoyan, a veteran commander, an historian Christian, a warrior who'd literally never lost a major battle. Kitbuka continued pushing south toward Egypt. He was thinking this would be easy. When Qutuz heard Hulagu had left, he saw his opening. Instead of waiting for the Mongols to invade Egypt, he made a bold, desperate gamble. He'd march his entire army north and meet them head-in Palestine, enemy territory. The numbers were now roughly equal. For the first time ever, the Mongols wouldn't have overwhelming numerical superiority. This would be a fair fight. The Mamluk army marched out of Cairo in summer 1260, through clever diplomacy. Qutuz even got safe passage through the Crusader kingdom of Acre. The Crusaders, also terrified of the Mongols, figured the Mamluks were the lesser evil. Let them pass. Let them resupply. Kitbuka heard the Mamluks were coming. He gathered his forces to meet them. The two armies would collide near a spring in the Jezreel Valley. The Arabic name, Ain Jalut, Goliath's spring. According to legend, the exact spot where David killed Goliath. Another battle of giants was about to begin, and the Mamluks were about to use the Mongols' own playbook against them. If you want to see how Baibars pulled off one of history's most brilliant ambushes, using the Mongols' own tactics against them. And what happened when Kitbuka realized he'd been trapped? Hit that like button right now. Every like helps us pull these forgotten battles out of the historical archives, where they've been collecting dust. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss these deep dive military history breakdowns. Now, back to September 3rd, 1260 and the trap that's about to snap shut. The first brilliant move the Mamluks made was choosing the battlefield itself. Ain Jalut was in a wide-open plain where Mongol cavalry could run circles around their enemies. It was a relatively tight valley, hemmed in by hills and trees, perfect terrain for an ambush. Baibars Qutuz's top general knew this area like the back of his hand. He was a Kipchak Turk, like Qutuz, sold into slavery. Risen through the ranks to become one of the most feared commanders in the Islamic world. Brilliant, charismatic, ruthless, incredibly ambitious. He and Qutuz were rivals. But right now, they were united against a threat that could erase them both. The plan they cooked up was as simple as it was genius. Beat the Mongols with their own favorite trick. Qutuz would hide the bulk of the Mamluk army, their elite heavy cavalry, in the wooded hills overlooking the valley. Meanwhile, Baibars would take a smaller force, maybe a few thousand men, down into the valley to meet the Mongols directly. His job: fight them, annoy them, frustrate them, and then, at exactly the right moment, run away. The feigned retreat, the Mongols' signature move. The tactic they'd use to destroy armies from China to Hungary. It takes incredible discipline to pull off, to make a retreat look real enough to be chased, but organized enough that it doesn't turn into actual disaster. Baibars, coming from the same warrior culture, knew exactly how to sell it. As the sun rose on September 3rd, it was at the Mamluks' backs, shining directly into the eyes of the advancing Mongols. When Kitbuka saw only Baibars' small force in the valley below, he must have felt pretty confident. The Mongols charged first. Baibars met them head-on. 4 hours. A swirling, chaotic battle raged in the valley. Baibars used classic hit-and-run tactics. Strike, fall back, strike again. Over and over. All designed to frustrate the Mongols and goad their proud, aggressive commander into making a mistake. Kitbuka wasn't used to this kind of resistance. He was used to enemies breaking, running in terror, begging for mercy. Goaded by Baibars' constant harassment, he made the exact mistake the Mamluks were counting on. On signal, Baibars' force broke. They turned and fled in what looked like total panic, running up the valley toward the very hills where the main Mamluk army was hiding. Kitbuka bought it completely. Hook, line, and sinker. Believing the enemy was broken, he ordered his entire army to charge forward and finish them off. His forces poured into the valley, chasing Baibars, leaving open ground behind, entering the Mamluk killing zone. Once the Mongol army was deep inside the trap, Qutuz gave the signal. From the hills on 3 sides, the main Mamluk army exploded out of hiding. Thousands of heavy horsemen crashed into the Mongol flanks. A storm of arrows rained down on the nose-surrounded army. The shock must have been unbelievable. 1 minute, they were the hunters. The next, they were the prey. But these were Mongol veterans. They didn't break easily. They absorbed the hit and started furiously fighting their way out. Kitbuka rallied his men and launched a counterattack so ferocious it actually broke the Mamluk left wing. For one terrifying moment, it looked like the Mongols were about to do what they always did: turn certain defeat into absolute victory. At this point, Baibars had executed the perfect ambush. The Mongols were surrounded, but Kitbuka was a veteran of 100 battles. What happened in the next 60 seconds would decide whether the Mongol Empire would rule the world or whether they could actually be stopped. Stay with me, because this is where it gets absolutely brutal. The Mamluk line was buckling. Kitbuka's counterattack had shattered their left wing. Mongol cavalry were pouring through the gap. The ambush was turning into a disaster. In minutes, the entire Mamluk army could collapse into a full rout. This was the crisis point. The moment where battles are won or lost. Sultan Qutuz saw his army about to break. Saw everything he'd fought for, everything his people had suffered through. About to be erased by the same force that had killed his family, destroyed his homeland, sold him into slavery. He made a decision, tore off his helmet so every single one of his men could see his face, so they'd know their sultan was right there with them. And he screamed a battle cry that echoed across the valley. Wah, Islama! Oh, for Islam! Then, he personally led his own guards in a desperate charge straight into the thickest part of the fighting. Straight at the Mongol breakthrough, the Sultan himself fighting in the front line, risking everything. That was it. That was the moment. Everything changed. Inspired by their Sultan's insane courage, the Mamluk line held, then pushed back, then shattered the Mongol counterattack completely. The momentum shifted like a tidal wave. Surrounded, exhausted, outnumbered for the first time in living memory, the Mongol army began to crack. Kitbuka fought like a demon until the very end. He was killed in the chaos, still swinging his sword, still refusing to retreat. Without their general, surrounded on all sides, the Mongol army finally broke. The Battle of Ain Jalut was over. The victory was total and absolute. The myth of Mongol invincibility, the psychological weapon that had conquered half the known world, was shattered at a spring called Goliath. For the first time in history, a Mongol army had been completely destroyed in a major battle and was unable to return to avenge the loss. The entire strategic calculus of the Middle East shifted in one afternoon. Qutuz rode into Damascus as a conquering hero just 5 days later. Within a month, all of Syria was cleared of Mongol forces. The westward expansion of the Mongol Empire, the unstoppable wave that had been rolling for decades, had been stopped dead in its tracks. The Mongols would try to invade Syria again over the years. They'd launch multiple campaigns. But they would never again be a serious threat to Egypt. Never again would they inspire that paralyzing terror. Ain Jalut had drawn a permanent line in the sand. The victory cemented the Mamluk Sultanate as the dominant power in the Middle East for the next 250 years. It ensured the survival of Islamic civilization in Cairo, which became the beating heart of the Arab world after Baghdad's destruction. Qutuz had done the impossible. A slave who became a sultan. A child prisoner of the Mongols who grew up to destroy them. He'd saved his civilization through brilliant strategy, perfect execution, and raw personal courage. He was a hero, a legend. But here's where this victory gets dark. Remember Baibars, the general who'd picked the perfect battlefield? Who'd executed the feigned retreat flawlessly? Who'd fought alongside Qutuz to pull off one of the greatest military victories in history? He was ambitious, and he wanted Qutuz's job. On the triumphant journey back to Cairo, as the army celebrated their impossible victory, Qutuz was assassinated in a conspiracy led by Baibars himself. The man who desaved Islamic civilization was murdered by his own general before he could even enjoy his victory. Baibars was immediately proclaimed the new sultan. He held that position for 17 years, making the Mamluks even stronger, turning them into an empire. The irony is brutal. Qutuz won the battle, saved his world, and was killed by his own side. The Battle of Ain Jalut is one of those hinge moments in history where everything could have gone differently. If Kitbuka had won, there's a real chance the Mongol Empire would have continued west into North Africa, into Europe. The entire map of the world would look different today. But that's not what happened. Instead, a small army of former slaves, led by brilliant generals, used their enemy's favorite tactic against them. they chose terrain carefully. They executed a plan with perfect discipline. And when everything was about to collapse, their leader showed the kind of personal courage that turns the tide of history. It proved that clever strategy could beat brute force, that the unstoppable could, in fact, be stopped, that knowing your enemy really knowing them could be more valuable than superior numbers. The legacy of Ain Jalut isn't just about one battle. It's about resilience. About how people who were literally sold as property became masters of empires. About how a civilization on the brink of extinction found a way to survive. The Mamluk Sultanate that emerged from this victory would dominate the Middle East for centuries. They'd stop multiple Mongol invasions, fight off crusaders, build Cairo into one of the great cities of the medieval world. Without Ain Jalut, there's no Mamluk Golden Age. No Cairo as the center of Islamic learning and culture after Baghdad's fall. The entire trajectory of Middle Eastern history pivots on what happened at that spring on September 3rd, 1260. But the story also carries a darker lesson. Qutuz never got to enjoy his victory, never got recognition in his own lifetime. The man who saved Islamic civilization was murdered before he could return home in triumph. History almost forgot him entirely, because Baibars, his assassin, went on to have the longer, more celebrated reign. For centuries, it was Baibars who got the glory. Baibars who was remembered as the great Mamluk Sultan. Qutuz became a footnote, if he was mentioned at all. That's what makes this battle so important to remember. Qutuz deserves to be remembered. Not just as a military genius, but as a symbol of what courage looks like when everything is on the line. When your entire world is about to be erased, and you choose to fight anyway. This is the kind of story that disappears if we don't tell it. If we don't dig into the archives and pull it back into the light. The Mongols built an empire on terror and violence. The Mamluks stopped them with intelligence, discipline, and guts. It's a reminder that no empire lasts forever, that no force is truly unstoppable, that the underdog, if they're smart enough and brave enough, can change the course of history. It was the day the storm finally broke. If this story gave you chills, if it made you think about courage and strategy and what it takes to stand up when the odds are impossible, do me a favor, right now hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to push this story to more people who need to hear it. These forgotten battles, these forgotten heroes, they deserve to be remembered. Hit subscribe and turn on that bell so you never miss when we drop these historical deep dives. We're pulling these stories from academic archives, military histories, and forgotten records every single week. Now drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. USA, UK, Egypt, Syria, Turkey, Pakistan. Our community spans the entire globe. You're not just watching history, you're keeping it alive. Tell us your location. Tell us if you'd heard of Ain Jalut before this video. Tell us what other forgotten battles we should cover. Just let us know you're here. Sultan Qutuz never sought fame, never wrote memoirs, never built monuments to himself. The only records that exist are scattered through medieval chronicles and military histories. Without videos like this, his story disappears completely. That's why this channel exists. To make sure commanders like Qutuz, soldiers like the Mamluks, battles like Ain Jalut don't vanish into silence. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring about these stories. Thank you for making sure Qutuz and his warriors don't disappear. These forgotten heroes deserve to be remembered. You're helping make that happen. I'll see you in the next one.